Welcome to Be Happy, Feel Great, where we bring in experts to teach you how to live the life of your dreams. I have an author with me today. Tom Glover recently wrote a book, a family historical book, and a lot of people, they have a book inside them. But I want you to hear how Tom took what was inside him and personal belongings to make it into a best-selling book. So, Tom, it's great seeing you. Thanks for being on Be Happy, Feel Great.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I didn't even get into the rest of your background, but you wrote the book. It's almost like a hobby or part-time because you're the CEO and the founder of a very successful company right now. Your background has been wonderful with all types of companies over the years, but the book part just fascinates me. And you mentioned it one time, and you know, not only that, your family, the Glover family goes back to the 1600s.
It does. It goes back.
All families go back to the 1600s, but locally, out on eastern Long Island. And can you maybe give us a little of that background?
Yeah, and a lot of that was the inspiration for the book. My wife, Jane, and I were doing a bit of genealogy research and discovered that the earliest immigrant to the new colonies, as it was a guy named Charles Glover. And in the early 1600s, he actually came over from England and with his wife in Massachusetts and spent a few years there. Unfortunately, his wife got into a little bit of trouble there, and Charles ended up coming to Southold to meet his buddies from England in the around 1640, where the Southold colony was established. So Charles Glover was the first Glover really to come to the New World from England. And he was quite a character. He was a shipbuilder. He was the constable. His title actually officially was lieutenant. And he had quite a life in Long Island.
That's really, it's something to be proud of, you know, when you have your roots going back that far. And like you said, going into the genealogy, I guess, is it easy to get into that when it's so local, or?
So yeah,
you know, it was available to you, libraries, things like that. Did the local people have a lot of information?
Well, fortunately, one of the things that Jane is really good at is research. So she was able to dig into a lot of the resources on the internet to find out this information. But a lot of this information actually existed in public libraries. There are all sorts of books, you know, recent books and older books that you can dig into to find out a lot of this information.
And that's great. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about, from that, like some of the other generations of Glovers and where they settled and what they did. I understand that, you know, a lot of farming took place in the rural North Fork back over the years.
Sure. Well, the family, the Glover family, as you might know from reading the book, moved a few miles down the road from Southold to Cutchogue. And Benjamin Glover in the early 1820s set up a farm on what's known as Cox Lane today in the main road. So he had quite a farm there, was a very successful farmer, and generations of Glovers farmed both sides of that road for many years. So we consider ourselves, you know, to be from Cutchogue and from Southold.
You know, I think you guys had so much acreage over the years, they should have called it Glover Lane instead of Cox Lane, you know.
I'm not sure of the origin of the name Cox Lane, but yeah, that would be a more fitting.
Well, it seems like back there they go by A, B, C, you know, it's Bridge and Alvers and Depot and, you know, I don't know, you know, it just seemed like it was going that way.
It fit the
Elijah's,
alphabet.
you know, it goes.
Right.
But no, I'm very familiar with the area, and I know that there's a lot of Glovers out there. And so what did they farm? You know, what was it back in the day?
Yeah, back then, about 200 years ago, it was a mixture of, agriculture was really a mixture of livestock and growing things like corn and wheat and hay to feed the animals. So it was really a mixture. And then as it evolved over the years, it really became known for cauliflower and potatoes and things like that. And as you know, Long Island potatoes are well known all over.
Yeah, today it's wine.
Today it's wine.
Today it's wine.
It's
so
changed.
where was Benjamin when we needed him?
Right. Well, it's wine and tourism, I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump ahead a little bit now.
Okay.
1944.
Sure.
Okay, we have a picture over here of your dad.
Yes.
Okay.
That's my dad around, I'd say at age 19.
19 years old, good-looking guy, and was he a farmer?
He came from a farming family.
Family.
So his family farmed, it would be the east side of Cox Lane, and for many, many years throughout the Depression, the family farmed there. And then things got really tough when World War II broke out. So my father's mother and father decided to move the family to New York, and both my father and his father went to work in the Brooklyn Navy Yard building ships for the war effort.
Okay, and then when your dad was 18, he decided to enlist?
He did something very special. Yes, he decided to, right after D-Day, he decided to enlist, and as an 18-year-old young man, he was very patriotic. And it was interesting, one of the things that happened was my grandmother, his mother, said to him, "I'll only let you enlist if you promise to do one thing, and that's to write me a letter every single day that you're in the Army."
Wow, it's, I could see where getting those letters to, when your grandmother got them, how special they would be, and hearing, that was the only source of communication and everything.
Yeah.
And did he write letters?
He wrote letters. He did it. He did his best. So he went basically to basic training in the United States, and he was part of what was known as the 106th Infantry Division in the Army. So he went to a number of different training camps in the United States, and then some of his colleagues in the 106th Infantry Division were shipped off to Europe to fight in Europe immediately. So my dad was fortunate in the sense that he was able to write a letter every night when some of his colleagues were already off and fighting. His colleagues from the 106th that went to fight in the war actually within 5 days found themselves fighting in the Battle of the Bulge, which is a very famous battle, as you probably know.
Yeah.
And my dad, shortly afterwards, in March of 1945, was shipped from training to Europe and into Germany.
And writing these letters, your grandmother was, I guess, living in Manhattan at the time?
That's correct.
Okay, so she would get these and save them, put them back in the envelopes after reading them. Probably read them about 3, 4, 5, 6 times, showed them to everybody, and that was the communication that she had. And how many were there over the time that he was there?
You're headed down a path of a story that I wanted to tell, and I think it's really important.
Okay.
So
Jump right in.
In the mid-1980s, we were cleaning our grandparents' apartment out. We were moving them out of their apartment. And in one of their closets, in the back of the closet, was this cardboard box about so big. And when we looked in the box, my uncle explained to us those were all the letters that our father had written to his mother during World War II.
Wow.
So a member of the family over the next 25, 30 years took responsibility for maintaining the box, but we really never knew it was in the box.
Yeah.
And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I took the opportunity to take a look at each letter. And it's amazing, Mike, you can tell how people read the letter over and over again. You can almost see the fingerprint marks. You can see where they very neatly cut open the envelope itself. And we found
this was so special, you don't want to rip it or anything.
Exactly.
And, although they're so anxious to see what's inside there, that's good that they were that meticulous with it.
Right. And we found a lot of things in the envelopes that, there was evidence. Treasure. I mean, evidence that my grandfather had opened it with his ubiquitous pocket knife. For example, we'd find pipe tobacco in the envelopes that you'd poured out.
Find any money?
Well, we did. We did find money. As a matter of fact, we found Belgian currency that had since expired, but it was pre-war Belgian currency. We found a number of other bills in there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All the treasures and everything. Well, so you get this letterbox. Yeah. Now we're talking right now to Tom Glover, an author who recently wrote a book, The Letterbox. So you see how it's starting to come together, and we're trying to let people know that we all have a message and we all have a story inside them. And you hear so many people today say, someday I'm going to write a book. Mm-hmm. And you did. Mm-hmm. You took these letters and keep going with the progression now. How did you get this letterbox? Who else did it go there along the way?
Yeah. So after a number of the family members passed the letterbox on for safekeeping over the years, I ended up with them, and I realized that the letters, being 70 years old, were starting to become very fragile. And after a period of time, pencil and ink start to fade a bit.
Okay.
So I was dedicated toward capturing the letters on a computer and making sure that the letters were available for future generations.
Wow.
Well, once I started reading the letters, I realized there was one heck of a story here. And the story, Mike, really isn't what I would call a bang, bang, shoot 'em up World War II story. The story is all about one young man's attempt to stay in close communication with his family during the most tumultuous time in history, and that was World War II. There was no email then, there was no electronic communication to speak of.
No.
There was airmail, but an airmail letter during World War II could take 10 to 14 days to get from one person to the other. So here, if you can imagine, here was my father writing a letter on day one, and my grandmother might not receive that letter until 2, 3, 4 weeks beyond that. Sometimes, because of censorship, she might not receive the letter at all.
Wow, that's something. Well, it says a lot for your dad. He really listened to his mom. She said, write a letter every day, mm-hmm. and he did. Mm-hmm. Or when he had an opportunity. I'm sure there's some days you just, in the Army, you couldn't squeeze in the time or whatever. Or right. Like you said, some of them might have got censored or whatever. But you had this letterbox in the family, and that's wonderful that it was preserved like that. A lot of people would just take it and, okay, the old grandma stuff, let's throw it out. But you looked to preserve it for generations. Mm-hmm. And did you think that you were going to be writing a book, or did it just evolve when you were trying to preserve it?
It evolved. I had no idea that this was going to become a book, but as we read through the letters and found out the contents of the letters, it became really amazing to us that a 19-year-old young man would be involved in issues on a world scope. I'll give you an example. He started to talk about in his letters this fantastic thing called the atom bomb. And we suddenly realized that we have a very different perspective of what might have happened 70 years ago than somebody sitting in a foxhole hearing about this fantastic thing called an atom bomb. He talks about the origins of the United Nations, and is the United Nations really good for the U.S., or is it something that will just be a challenge for us to manage all this time? Right. So these are some of I'll call them the non-family issues that he got into.
Right.
He got into world issues.
And this is what they're talking to each other about, so he's really sharing the conversation of the guys in the military.
Exactly,
And,
exactly.
And I love what you did in the book. What Tom has is actually some of the letters, some of them you had to edit a little bit, if it was repeating and things like that. But I even saw, if there was a misspelled word, you tried to do it as authentic as you could have it, And it was wonderful. But after that, you would have a nice explanation about the letter and telling us what was happening during World War II. So it's not only the letter, but it's Tom's interpretation of the letter that really makes it just fantastic, and just a great read for anybody who's looking to get it.
Thanks, Mike. One of the best examples I love to tell the story about is the topic of ice cream. You know, you and I take ice cream for granted these days, but to a serviceman or a servicewoman, you know, somewhere in Europe in the 1940s, to have an ice cream as a treat was a fantastic thing. So the U.S. Army and the Navy actually built ice cream parlors. The Navy had a floating ice cream parlor.
Is that right?
And what they would try and do to increase the morale of these service people was to get the ice cream delivered to the front or to, you know, to anybody in the service.
Yeah.
So, you know, reading his letters where he was so tickled pink, he thought about, gee, I can't wait to get home and have an ice cream soda. It was interesting for me, the concept of, you know, the military providing that ice cream, I thought was pretty interesting.
That's great.
Yeah.
And, you know, to write a book and do all the research, one person can't do it.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you had a lot of help, and, you know, you mentioned the Glovers, and I think your wife was very instrumental in a lot of the research. I know you said, you know, it started out with going online, some of it, and researching some of the early Glovers, but who helped you now with the letters and the ideas and where you move forward on it?
Yeah, so it was really a family project. So it was, you know, I mentioned my wife Jane, but also it was my brother Rob, his wife Terry, my older brother Joe, and my uncle Rich and his family, and Aunt Erna. There were a number of family sort of discussions about the
Right,
the
you
subject.
read the letter and everybody talks a little bit about it. You're probably there taking notes. You know,
Yeah,
okay, hold
absolutely.
on, let me grab.
Absolutely, and it was a labor of love over a 3-year period. It really took quite a bit of time to first put the letters in chronological order, and then to try and decipher, you know, what was he saying in each letter? Because sometimes my father was a very straightforward talker. You know, most of the time you knew exactly what he meant, but sometimes when he was talking about subjects, particularly military subjects or Army subjects during World War II, we had to do a little bit of research to find out about that.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And again, he was only 18, 19 years old, right? 20 years old,
Right.
you know, so you knew him as your father.
Yeah.
But back then, he was still a kid, really.
That's
at
exactly
that
right.
age, you know.
That's exactly
And,
right.
That's amazing that you guys have all that. And if I remember when I read the book, you mentioned your brother Rob and his wife Terry. They held the letterbox for a while, right? Didn't they have it in their possession before, you know, you got it?
They did. They did a great job for a number of years preserving the letters. And one of the neat things that Rob and Terry did was they took some of the interesting letters and they put them in an artistic way to outline and show how important the letters were to the family. So yeah, they did a lot.
They did. So each person, and your older brother, and your uncle, and your aunt,
My mother, I had to ask my
Your
mother.
mother?
My father was not married to her at that point yet, so, but I did get a lot of background from her as well. And I think my aunt Erna, who is my father's sister-in-law, really summed up the book the best, I think. She said and described it as, it's a story about an 18-year-old man who goes to war and he comes home a 20-year-old experienced serviceman. He had really seen and done a lot in that 2 or 3 year time frame, and he grew up.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's where you go. You're going from a boy to a man, you know, at that age, you know, when you go into the service and everything.
Right.
You know, it's
Right.
quite an experience. The book is called The Letterbox. It's available on Amazon, Kindle.
Yes.
Which you can get on Amazon also.
That's
and
correct.
if you search the web, there's many other places that you can get Tom Glover's book, The Letterbox. I think it's great that your timing, probably you didn't plan on it, but it is the 70th anniversary of World War II, right? The end of World War II.
That's right. That's right. And that was one of the drivers for wanting to get it published. We've just published it recently, and now we're in the process of getting the message out and sharing it with people. And Mike, I want to share this with you, that any of the net proceeds from the books are going to military-related charities. So we thought it was helpful that it is the 70th anniversary, and we could promote the books in that manner.
That's wonderful what you guys are doing, and I understand that it also has been picked to be in a World War II library, is it?
Yeah, one of the neat things is we sent a copy. It's in the Cutchogue Library, but also we were really honored to be accepted by the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and the book is there now. So if you're in New Orleans and at the library, please ask for a copy of the book.
That's wonderful. And of course we have, beside your dad and the book and everything, I guess this has a story too.
Yeah, this is my dad's Army jacket. It's a little worn, but one of the things that we talk about in the book, and again, this is from an 18, 19-year-old's perspective. He wants to be promoted. He wants to do a good job, be recognized for what he is, and get promoted. And you could see he was what was known as a technical sergeant at that time, with his 3 chevrons, his 3 stripes, and that's what the jacket represents. I think I mentioned before he was in the 106th Infantry Division. But when the war was over, one of the things that he did was he was what was known as a Jeep reconnaissance scout. So he would, by himself, or he would take senior officers around to various parts of Germany to scout out what was happening at the time, and he wore this jacket then.
Wow, and you have that in the family too.
Yeah.
And I understand somebody in the family had his revolver for a while too,
Well,
right?
That's another great, two I think interesting points of view. One of the things my dad did is he bought a very special German Mauser pistol as a souvenir, and he really cherished that. He brought it home with him, and then we were fortunate enough to donate it to the West Point Museum, so that gun can be seen at the West Point Museum. And so we were very, very pleased about that. The other thing that happened is my father had a lot of photographs that he took while he was serving during the war and after the war, and the pictures can be seen at the University of Florida Library, where they're on display there.
Isn't that something? Mm-hmm. You really did a lot for just your family and generations of Glovers, to have a book like this published. And you really saved all this stuff. Like you said, after 70 years, it weathers, the ink, the pencil, whatever he's working on, another 10, 15 years, it might not even be legible. And, here it is now, it's digital, and,
right.
Well,
I got to give the credit, you had asked before, I got to give the credit for the cover and the cover art to my daughter Katie and to my wife Jane. They designed it. Katie took one of the letters that she thought was particularly meaningful, and the statement here is, "I'll be lucky, and if not, 9 out of 10 come home, Mom, so please don't worry." So that's where that photograph comes from, one of the actual letters, and then Jane and Katie put the cover together.
They did a great job.
Thank you.
I thought that was so meaningful when I got my copy of the book and looked at that and said, wow, that is special, and knowing that it was going home to your mom and everything. So
Good.
The odds were in his favor, and he came back, became a police officer after that?
Yeah, so...
isn't that great?
It was.
Using the skills and everything that he learned. And
Right. Yeah, one of the challenges is at the end of the war, after the war is over, you can see in the letters and the correspondence, he's really a young man trying to figure out which route should he take in life. Should he go into plastics? Should he go into automobiles? What sort of things should he get into? Long story short, Mike, he became a police officer in New York City when he came home, and was eventually promoted to sergeant, worked on a number of very dangerous details. And my mother convinced him to retire, which he did. But he had a very good career as a police officer in New York City.
so he really scared your mother a few times.
Quite a few times.
Both, not an easy job.
There's nothing like waking up at 3 a.m. and seeing your mother sitting there waiting for your father to come home, and he's already 3 hours late. It's not a comfortable feeling.
You must be so proud of him, though, and everything.
He was a great guy.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you have a book under your belt now, and you can't sit still, even though you're the CEO and, president of a company and working hard and doing a lot of things, but what's next?
Well, I've got another book on the way, Mike. So I've got I'd say I'm about 90% through the writing of the book, and the comment I've always heard is, well, what should you write about as an author? And in this case, I'm writing about what I know best, and again, it's about my family. So that's what I'm doing next.
Okay, let's just stop there for a minute.
Okay.
So for people watching it, and if you always thought about a book, think about that, you know, writing about your family. Is there a story? Is there research that you could do? And even if it's not going to be a #1 New York Times bestseller, it could be something for your family. It could be something that you feel good about, you have it inside you, and it's special. Okay? Tom, tell us a little bit more. Okay, this is interesting. We're going to have you back on the show, I think, at a later date, too. But can you just maybe in the next minute tell
Sure.
us briefly about this book?
Sure. Well, this is a story about a young man in the late 1800s who basically tried to defraud his family out of their inheritance. He forged a document which basically gave a lot of property to him and not to his family. And it became quite an involved story in the sense of it involved ex-congressmen, it involved the governor of New York State, it involved quite a few prominent judges and attorneys at that time.
Really?
So, yeah.
Wow, and we're getting a sneak preview of it right now. Now, this didn't happen in little old Cutchogue, did it?
This happened in Little Old Country.
And these were Glovers? This was somebody in the Glover clan?
I'm gonna reserve comment on that. But soon, in the very near future, in the next few months, I'll be able to issue some information about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Well, this is fascinating. I want to talk to you more, and as the book gets near completion. But for right now, anybody watching, Letterbox, great read. It's the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, and all profits are going towards related charities of servicemen and, you know, different organizations like that. So, Tom, you did a great job. You, your family, and the Glovers, great family on the North Fork, and I'm just thrilled that you were here today.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Appreciate it.
Okay, good luck with the book, and it's great.
Thank you.